I wanted to talk a little bit about the general features of the Swedish and Korean ecosystem on startups, and a little bit about the context of how we can work together in developing those together in the future. So just on a broad scale, it's very interesting to see the commonalities between our countries. They're quite far apart, and we have a lot of cultural differences, but we actually share a common journey from being two very poor agricultural societies, and on a relatively short time scale we've developed into two of the leading economies and leading knowledge nations in the world. And we've done this very systematically through investments in education, into research, into knowledge development, and a lot of hard work. I think Swedes and Koreans are, even though we take longer vacations in the summer, I think we both consider ourselves some very hard-working individuals. And these are part of the things that we're celebrating during Nobel Week. So thanks to these investments, Sweden and Korea, we have year after year now for the past few years ranked among the most innovative countries in the world. We also are among the top 5 in terms of total R&D investments. Although we see a lot of other countries, especially, notably this data is a couple of years old, but countries like Taiwan and the US are really advancing their levels also. We're seeing in the Nordics, Finland is making big advancements here also. So we need to keep up and need to stay on top of this. And of course, just as in Sweden and in Korea, the primary source of this R&D funding as a percentage of GDP is coming from industry. But the governmental, the public funds that's being put in is seen as a leveraging point to be able to get access to that things. And for two relatively small, I'm not calling Korea small to be this, but if we look at the global scale, two relatively small countries, we have a huge broad industry base in both of our countries, a surprisingly large level of excellence within these industry areas. Not as much wood and paper and pulp here perhaps as it is in Sweden, but certainly within metals. We're in Poland, where the head of POSTECH is, a lot of trade in services and consumer products, transport, automobiles, batteries, defense industry, pharmaceuticals and life science, ICT, batteries, clean tech. These are all staple industries of both Korea and Sweden, and that gives a lot of leverage for us to be able to work together in these areas. So, and also, if you look at the finer details of this, there's actually a nice level of complementarity as to where we position ourselves in the TRL levels and in the supply chains within each of these industries. So there's always a nice match between our industries depending on how you look at them. And finally, as we have touched on earlier today, we also share not just common industries, but we share a lot of common challenges. We have come out of the global pandemic, which was a life-changing event for all of us. There is increasing geopolitical issues we've also heard about. This is something that we need to navigate together. It's affecting both of our countries in more similar ways than I think any of us would like. There's an energy crisis. We need to look at the future. Where's this dramatic rise in need for energy going to come from? We both have extremely rapidly aging populations that we need to deal with, demographic issues, and of course, the topic of today, which is on the lips of everybody, is climate change and how do we mitigate some of those issues together. And the transformative solutions that are required to address these are not going to come from the Samsungs and the Hyundais and the Ericssons and the Volvos. They're going to come from small companies. It's going to come from you guys, no pressure. But that's just the case. But these large companies where we share commonality are avenues to which we can access and promote these technologies, promote these solutions out to a broader market. So just looking at the possibilities, these are the areas that I come across every day at the embassy of where we can work together. It's not just in science and technology and research and innovation. There's a lot of potential for investment opportunities, questions of national and economic security, sustainability issues where we have a lot to learn from each other, but also societal development. Welfare technology, pension reform, demographics, etc., but also redundancies in supply chains. Now that we're seeing, quite dramatic shifts on a geopolitical level in terms of protectionism, new sources and diversification of our supply chains. These are areas where Sweden and South Korea are really key. And of course, competence development, because if there's one thing that the whole world is lacking and the whole world is looking for, it's access to expertise. And let us share that challenge together. Okay, but with that said, as we've heard earlier, Sweden is a very small country. We're about 10 million people. So we're about 0.13% of the world's population. So, I mean, that's not a big number. 0.13%. That means that we are 0.13% of the footprint of the world. The world's markets, the world's climate, affects the percentage of global knowledge, the percentage of global dependency. And that is very important. I guess here in Korea it's about 0.6% then. It's not a lot. So we need to work, both of our countries, and we've heard that earlier also, we need to work globally as a start, and we need to approach that situation together. Now, despite this smallness, we've actually been able in Sweden to, be quite successful in our work with developing our startup and innovation ecosystem. So I'm going to be pushing a little bit on promoting Sweden here, but I work with the embassy. This is kind of my job, so just bear with me. So what is like the secret sauce to Sweden's work here? Well, there are both institutional and there are cultural components here that I think are worth highlighting. In Sweden is one of the most decentralized countries in the world. We have very small ministries, we have a very small central government. There's a lot of independent agencies and a lot of work that's being done out in regions and on municipal levels. This has pros and cons. But I think this is one of the reasons that we've developed this triple helix model so efficiently. I mean, we have a very strong history of working collaboratively between private sector, academia, and government, bottom up and challenge-based, and having access to the people we need to gather around a problem to solve it. And that's partly due to the fact that we are so decentralized. We need to have access to those people on a local level. As we've heard, very strong investments in research and higher education. We have a very mature ecosystem for innovation in Sweden. I'll get back to that a little bit. A vast cluster of strong universities, strong research infrastructure, innovation offices, science parks, incubators, as well as industry clusters, a strong regional positioning of different regions in Sweden towards different sectors. And this creates critical mass, and that's very attractive. It's attractive to foreign investment, that's attractive to accessing new companies and new expertise. Of course, a well-functioning, stable economy and political system helps to this also. And as I mentioned earlier, very successful global companies that export on a global level that can be used as leverage for promoting and growing our startups in Sweden. The cultural dimensions, I think, are equally as interesting and important. There's a strong culture of engineering, creativity, and entrepreneurship. It's kind of in our DNA in Sweden. Very strong startup culture, a number of very successful entrepreneurs that also feed back into the system and promote the rise and the funding of new companies. So access to financing, which of course can be improved everywhere, but I think is relatively good in Sweden. There's also a non-hierarchical and flat business organization culture, so people are easy to access. You can't actually get CEOs on the phone. You don't have to waddle through 20 levels of hierarchy in Sweden. And the same goes to some extent for the political level. Also, there's a high level of trust. There's trust into institutions in Sweden. There's a relatively high trust in the government. There's trust in our public agencies and a trust in science, which is extremely important. And of course, then there's the work-life balance and the freedom of speech. Very important to mention that we have the highest female employment rates in Europe, and we are at the top of the gender gap. Or not the top, but we're number one position on having the lowest gender gap in terms of salaries. So this is an area also where the inclusiveness. I heard a gentleman from MSIT last year, I won't mention names, but said to me, how are we supposed to, in Korea, be the leading knowledge nation in the world if we're only using 50% of our brains? So we need to work with everything that we have in our systems, and promoting culture and inclusion is an important part of that. So if we look at the innovation funding system in Sweden, we have Vinnova in the room here. We also have a number of public-private foundations, SSF for example. The Wallenberg Foundation is a very important funder of basic science in terms of grants on the far left there of your screen. Of course, the Swedish Research Council and a number of other research councils. And then we have, a wide range of organizations that support in terms of loans and semi-soft grants, applied research through Vinnova and Swedish Energy Agency, loans, etc., through ALMI, and then all the way up until government-backed or private venture capital and investments on the right-hand side. There's also a very broad level of organizational support for this in Sweden, a number of incubators, accelerators, science parks, etc., that are quite contextual also in terms of the markets that they support and the areas within which they are active. So this is also an important part of the equation. The teacher's exemption is something, I'm sure that many of you have heard of this. This is something that's quite unique in Sweden. In Sweden, when you're a researcher, you don't have to be a professor, you can be a PhD student or a postdoc also, and you make a discovery at a university, you own the right to commercialize that invention. It does not belong to the university. So there's pros and cons to this too. I usually say, the greatest potential, or the greatest upside of the teacher's exemption is that it gives great opportunity and possibility to the individual. But the greatest downside is that it gives great opportunity and possibility to the individual as well. So it really depends on the individual here. How do you manage that responsibility and that opportunity that's given to you? But certainly something that is a cause for Sweden to be one of the most prolific countries in the world when it comes to generating startups. We are at number 9. This is from the Dealroom report last year. Globally, this is not per capita, this is total in the number of unicorns generated. And this is after countries, that are, 10 or 100 times larger than Sweden is. We also have the highest level of VC investment per capita for our companies in Sweden. And this is the gap there is growing from 2022 to 2023. KTH would be very happy with this slide. University alumni that have founded startups that raised over 10 million euros. That's 172 in total from KTH. And a number of other universities, of course, are very prolific. So university founders, based on the teacher's exemption, is an extremely important part of contribution and development of the Swedish ecosystem. So I will end on this slide just because we are very short on time, but I think this is a nice picture that also shows kind of the totality of how we develop these issues in Sweden. The university-based research, the basis of knowledge we have, the investments we have in basic research infrastructure to create companies as spin-offs from that, and also individual idea owners that use the teacher's exemption. And then we have the fundamental components in Sweden to develop these in terms of the university innovation offices, the incubators, the holding companies, the accelerators, etc., all the way up to where we can actually get companies to scale in partnership with the private sector, where we have global organizations that can help to scale these or settle out on their own to individual businesses. So I think if I wanted to end this introduction with anything, just as a kind of a take home, I completely agree with the previous panel discussion that we need to develop context-specific ecosystems. You cannot carbon copy one and place it into the other one. There are too many cultural and market-specific barriers for that. But we can learn from each other. We can learn from the examples that are made, from the pitfalls that I've had there, and that's something that we can share on an equal basis. We also need to develop further, and this I think goes for Sweden and a lot of Europe, that the long-term prerequisites for scaling and growing our companies on the local field. We're losing too many companies to the US, we're losing too many companies to China, especially on the deep tech area where we need very patient and long-term funding. And the third thing I think is to just remember that number, 0.13%. Okay? In terms of the impact that our companies are doing, if we're talking about climate tech, keeping a climate tech, we can develop that into the most successful company in the world. But if it stays in Sweden and is only applied in Swedish industry, Swedish energy production, we are cutting global carbon emissions by 0.13%. That's not getting us anywhere. So go global from the start, but rush to get there, but rush patiently, because that's what's going to be required. So I will stop there. Thank you very much.